You know, we all want a green world. I can't think of anybody that doesn't want one. Of course, there's people with ulterior motives, right? That's a different thing. But California has really caused itself a whole lot of non-green. Rooftop solar, right? That's going to be the solution to all of our problems. Yeah. Not the fact that the electric cars people buy use 3 times as much electricity as our air conditioners. Yeah, not the fact that we have rolling blackouts because we don't have enough power because we've shut down plants before we were actually ready to replace that power. Not that Texas is right now having blackouts, as is California having blackouts because of the stupidity of some of these regulators. It's absolutely crazy. You know, we are the greenest country in the world. All of our plants, our coal plants, are cleaner than anybody else's anywhere in the world. And California's really got itself into a big problem here because, again, of short-sightedness. I just don't get it. You know, maybe it is follow the money. Maybe, you know, Nancy Pelosi's husband making millions of dollars and using inside information is absolutely true, and maybe it has to do with that, right? It's not really green. It's to enrich the politicians. How can you go to Washington, D.C. on the salary Congress has, as expensive as it is in Washington, D.C., and come out a multimillionaire? There's only one way that can happen, right? I remember the trade that Hillary Clinton made. What was it, beef or something, right? And she made like $80,000. Well, you know, that sort of tip is a sort of thing that'll put Martha Stewart in jail. But not our politicians. It's absolutely crazy. I don't get it. So California, they have been a pioneer in pushing for rooftop solar panels. Now, I get it. They're cool. I get it. It's really nice to have the grid buy electricity back from you when there is plenty of sun and when the grid needs it. But the grids aren't really set up for this sort of stuff. But I know a few listeners that really love their solar panels. There's one guy who has put a whole bunch of panels up, solar panels, in a field, and he has some cattle and horses and stuff, and so they live with these solar panels in the field, and he bought himself a couple of Nissan Leafs. These are these electric cars from Nissan. You might remember them. They've been around for a while. And he's just tickled pink that, yeah, he had to buy the solar panels. Yeah, he had to install them. Yeah, he has to keep the snow off of them. Yeah, he has to clean the dust off of them. Yeah, he has to clean all of the bird stuff off of them. But it's free. Right? Yeah, okay. So he gets to drive around, and he says, you know, I don't usually go much further than the grocery store, or maybe a quick run to Tractor Supply, and it doesn't cost him anything incrementally. So California decided it was going to go green, right? And what's one of the best ways to do that? Well, we need more electricity. Let's go for rooftop solar. In fact, California decided it would go ahead and subsidize these wonderful solar panels on people's roofs all over the place. Not like one big central farm out in the Mohave Desert that's collecting all of the solar it can possibly collect and then turn it into electricity that can feed into the grid. No, it's all decentralizes on all of these rooftops. Now, we're talking about 20 years later. There are 1.3 million rooftops estimated to have solar cells on them out there in California. And the real bill is coming due. It isn't cleaning the bird excrement off. The real bill in California for the rooftop solar isn't getting the snow off of them, keeping them clean. No, it has to do with completely non-green stuff here. 90% of all of these solar cells that were put onto roofs in California that have been taken down, 90% of them have ended up in landfills. Yeah, absolutely. Now, the lifetime expectant lifetime of these solar panels is 25, maybe 30 years, as long as they're not damaged. Or if you really want to keep up with the technology, because solar panels are increasing in efficiency as time goes on, it might be a lot less, right? It might be like a 10 to 15 year cycle if you have that much money out there. But many of these are now winding up in landfills. And the real concern is that they could contaminate groundwater. I've talked about this before. If these solar panels crack, what could happen? Well, they have heavy toxic metals in them, such as lead. We know how bad lead is, right? Can't have lead in your house anymore. Selenium, cadmium, right? All things you don't want to have. Mercury vapor. You don't want to go anywhere near mercury vapor, except for the fact that the federal government forced us to put them into our homes in the form of curly Q light bulbs. Remember those things? Yeah, highly toxic. Breaking one of those light bulbs, a fluorescent light, makes your home a toxic waste site, according to EPA regulation. So I'm sure if you ever had a fluorescent light bulb break, and that includes the bigger ones, right? You might have in the roof, up on the top of your office, wherever it might be. You must have went out and you bought, maybe even had standing by for you, some really wonderful plastic that you could put up, tape up, so that you can isolate the room that has the toxic waste in it from breaking that light bulb that the federal government made you buy, because you couldn't buy regular incandescent bulbs that you wanted anymore. And they encouraged you, and they gave you discounts on it, and they subsidized those bulbs. And then of course you went in with a full respirator and a full suit on that Tyvek, and you taped it up, make sure that tape up around the gloves onto the Tyvek suit, so that none of that mercury gets onto your skin. And then you obviously used a specialized vacuum cleaner for toxic hazardous waste, and vacuumed up like the carpet or the floor, or maybe it got onto your couch, right? You did all of that. And then you put it all into a sealed container of some sort, typically like a glass bottle or something, so it's not going to be able to get out. Right? You must have done all of that, because I'm sure everyone knew what was going on with those fluorescent bulbs, those little curly Q bulbs, right? Does that make sense to you? Yeah, exactly. So now California has 1.3 million rooftops with rooftop solar power on them. Now, it isn't like it's out in, as I mentioned, a great place. Put it out in the Mohave Desert, right? They got more sun than they need out there. And so it's all one place, and they can take those panels and they can recycle them. No, because it's illegal to recycle them in California, because of the heavy metals, the toxic metals. So instead of that, people are just dumping them in their trash and taking them to landfills, etc., etc. We're talking about truckloads of waste, some of this stuff badly contaminated, and it really shows how short-sighted environmental policy can create incredible problems that were easily foreseen, right? Though the industry is supposed to be green, but in reality, according to Sam Vanderhoff, who is a solar industry expert, chief executive of Recycle PV Solar, he says the reality about this industry is not that it's green, but in reality, it's all about the money. Wait a minute, isn't that what I just said earlier? Yeah. So California came early with solar power. They granted $3.3 billion in subsidies for installing solar panels on rooftops. And yet, barreling ahead with this renewable energy program, they are now at a point where they have rolling blackouts. They have problems with electricity generation. They have problems with the rooftop solar. And as it is aged, getting rid of it. Have you seen those pictures of Hawaii with those windmill farms? that are just sitting there rusting away because the windmills aren't turning. You'd think Hawaii, right? A lot of wind. Isn't that a great way to do it? But it takes a lot of space, kills some birds, and it takes a lot of maintenance. They're very expensive to maintain. So they just let some of these wind farms just totally rust away. We need to elect people, send them to Washington, D.C., that don't touch things like this with a 5,000-foot pole. The reason is that you look at a great investor, a great business investor, that they make money, right? Oh, wouldn't it be great to be Mark Cuban or one of the sharks, right, that are making money, investing money? Well, yeah, it certainly would be. They, at best, make money out of 1 out of 10 investments. Federal government, that's pretty close to zero, right? Oh, no, that's not true, right? We talked about the millions of dollars that Congress people make. Yeah, so they don't bat zero. The Congress and this political class bats 1,000 in their own pocket. Let's stop this stuff in Washington, D.C. It's insanity. Thank goodness California did this so we can see how insane these solar rooftop policies are, at least for the near future. Well, we've talked about solar cells. We've talked about the new nuclear, which is incredible stuff. Well, there is a new MIT spinout that's tapping into a million-year energy supply right here. Government has been terrible about picking winners. It kind of reminds me of a quote from Henry Ford where he said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And that's kind of the mentality of government. Whatever they're investing in, or their friends, their buddies, their voters, their donors are investing in, that's what they'll push. So we haven't had a fair shake of some of these technologies, really. You know, the hydrogen, who knows what else we could be powering our cars with that hasn't come forward because government's been putting just literally trillions of dollars of support into electric cars. Okay, an electric car is great, don't get me wrong. They're cool technology. I wouldn't mind owning one of them. But the government should not be the one who decides the winners and losers. That's the communist way. That's central planning. Central planning does not work. I'm really on a bit of a rampage today. This is just crazy. But this is a reason right now, what I'm going to talk about, why central planning has failed us yet again. Right? Just because it's a big problem doesn't mean it's a federal government problem. And the big problem is, okay, all of us want green stuff, right? Not this green movement that's all about, again, central planning, government control, not that stuff. But we want a clean environment. We want good, healthy food. We want all of the stuff that's going to make us healthy, the world healthy, the earth healthy, feed the population of the world, everything. Everybody does. I don't get it. I don't know why anyways, we won't get into that right now. Here's an example. Government has been moving us directly towards solar panels, which we've talked about, and how they really can and do hurt the environment very, very badly. We talked about the disposal of them. We've talked before about the manufacturing of solar panels and how it is horrific when it comes to the health of our planet. How about this one? This MIT group, it's really kind of cool here. Quaise Energy is this company that they founded, and it is a spin out from MIT. And what they're looking to do is use the power potential that's beneath our feet in order to create literally a carbon-free, pollution-free energy source. absolutely amazing. Now, we've talked about this for a long time. You look at some of these countries in the world that have a lot of volcanic activity. I'm particularly thinking about Iceland right now, and how they are taking all of this geothermal potential and turning it into electricity, which is fantastic, right? And when you look at the stability of geothermal, it is dead on. It is there. It is always there. If you're looking at the stability of geothermal, for instance, just think of a volcano. How often do the volcanoes move? It's pretty solid, pretty long term. Certainly there's tectonic activity and the plates move, but it's at just an incredibly slow rate. You're talking about inches a year. Well, they've looked at a couple of things. One is this abandoned coal power plant in upstate New York. And as overall, people are looking at it saying it's worth nothing, right? It's a relic from ages gone by. Heaven forbid we burn coal. And I would rather not burn coal, personally. But get down and think about this now. You've got a coal power plant. What does that have in it that might be useful? Well, it still has transmission lines that run to the grid, the power grid. It's a central producer of electricity, which is exactly how our power grid is set up. We're not set up for having every home, or half of them or whatever it is, generating electricity with solar power or having windmills here and there. We're set up for having centralized power generation, Nikola Tesla aside. Right? That's how we're set up. So this old coal power plant has transmission lines. It still has a power turbine. How does a coal plant work? How does a nuclear plant work? It generates heat, and that heat creates steam, and that steam is used to drive a turbine. Much like what happens at a hydroelectric dam. The water drives a turbine, and then that turbine ultimately, of course, drives a massive alternator of some sort of a generator, if you will. And that's hooked up to our power lines. Now, what's really interesting here is their technology. You might have heard about this place. I remember reading about this and all kinds of interesting stories about this hole that was drilled in Russia, I think it was. And they went down, what was it, like 5,000 feet or something? And they abandoned it, right? Because they were trying to do the whole thing. But here's the interesting part of what the MIT guys are saying, that the crust anywhere in the world, it kind of varies a little bit, but basically about 10 to 20 kilometers deep, has enough geothermal energy to drive something like this power plant, this old coal power plant in upstate New York. But the problem is, how do you drill that deep? The Russians, the Soviet Union, had a hard time doing it, and they didn't reach their ultimate goal. And interesting backstories on all of that we don't have time for today. But what these guys are doing is they have created an approach that vaporizes the rock. So they're not drilling. And if you've ever seen drilling operations, watched it on the Discovery Channel or something, which I have, it's really cool. You realize that when they start hitting hard rock, granite, bedrock, they stop because it becomes so slow. So they use the diamond tip drill heads and they drill, and it's slow. But what's happening right now is they're using gyrotrons to heat the material. It's been done for years in nuclear fusion experiments, but they're taking that basic technology and using it for new geothermal drilling techniques. That is cool. So these gyrotrons haven't been well known in the general science community. Fusion researchers know about it, but what they're saying is this is going to give them the ability to drill these massive holes, depth-wise. And right now, 400 feet is kind of as far as we can usually drill. But this is going to let them go kilometers into the earth. They're going to be able to tap into that, the energy here. Basically, you're talking about what you get out of a volcano, right? That sort of energy, that heat. Bring it up and then boil the water and run it through that coal power plant. At least the infrastructure that's in there, the generators and everything else. So very, very cool. And this is something that's being done right now. They expect within a few years to have an actual functional demonstration of this, blasting its way through melting rock, and some of the hardest rock on the surface of the earth. Hey, you should have received my insider show notes Tuesday morning. If you didn't, you can get them for free. Just go to craigpeterson.com. And if you have any questions, just email me, me@craigpeterson.com. Do you remember this moment from The Fifth Element?
Old tricks are the best tricks, eh?
Yeah, well, we're talking about attackers right now, cybersecurity, and the old tricks are the best tricks. No doubt about that. They're back to the old ways. Yep. Oh, well. There are a lot of security firms out there. It's just absolutely amazing to me. I get ads all of the time, as you can imagine, from dozens and dozens of startups and big guys. And I'm looking at a page right now, and there's, 6 different ads on here for cybersecurity stuff. This is a site called Dark Reading. It's one that I pay some fairly close attention to because they are talking about cybersecurity stuff, so I guess that makes sense. But attackers are doing things every day. Right now, what are they doing? That's what Robert Lemos is talking about. And he's looking at a report that was produced by yet another security firm called Tetra Defense. And they analyzed data from the first quarter 2022. Now, when you think about cybersecurity and the problems we have, what do you think about? What do you think of? Is it ransomware? Phishing, maybe? What do you think it is? Well, what this Tetra Defense found is that 54% more costs here from compromises caused by user actions comes from, drumroll, Pete, please. I don't know if I said that very, very well. Let me just do that one more time, okay? Take 2. Compromises cost victims 54% more when we're talking about unpatched servers and vulnerable remote access systems like Microsoft RDP, remote desktop. 54% more. That is huge. Absolutely huge. Who would have thought of that? By the way, these unpatched vulnerabilities from the first quarter and exposing risky services such as remote desktop protocol account for 82% of successful attacks, while social engineering employees, and that includes things like phishing, accounted for just 18% of successful compromises. That, my friends, is a very, very big deal. And as I said at the very beginning, it is an old trick that they've been up to for a long time. So what I'm trying to get at here, I know I'm kind of wandering a little here mentally, but I'm trying to get at the point that we have to patch our systems, and we have to apply patches ASAP. We have to make sure those patches are in place because it's an absolutely horrible situation out there. I know a lot of companies that use Microsoft's remote desktop, and it has been just a horrific battleground when it comes to hackers because of all of the bugs that have been found in there and major vulnerabilities. The log4 shell bug, this is the one that's tying into Java, has been reported on a whole lot, but it is used in about 22% of breaches. So that's not bad for one vulnerability. And it's a crazy vulnerability. This is a problem with languages like Java, where you have people writing code that don't realize what's happening in all of these libraries they're pulling in. In Java, you just say, okay, write this out to a file for me. And don't realize that the code that's actually doing that is parsing what you send it, and it might have a command in it that you send to it, and it'll execute the command. And that's the basics of that particular problem, okay? So we're expecting all of these tactics to continue. There are a finite amount today of vulnerable exchange servers, which is another problem that the attackers have been using to really cause a whole lot of problems for us. But there will be new problems in the future. There's always new software introduced, and the new software always has more problems. And there are a lot of people in the cybersecurity business that say we should just assume that systems are compromised. So instead of trying to protect them as much, let's look for the compromises, which is an interesting way of doing things, frankly. So cloud misconfiguration, that's another big one that's out there, and I'm seeing that all of the time. Right now we're working with a client that's using a lot of Microsoft Azure stuff. And Microsoft Azure, Amazon, in fact, Amazon S3 buckets, which are a way to store files up in the cloud inside Amazon, have really been hit hard because of misconfiguration. You see, when it gets very difficult to configure something, people tend to take shortcuts, don't think it through, and in this case, they have lost a whole lot. But it's hard to estimate the damages, but looking at it, we're talking about major cybersecurity incidents accounting for about 2 to 10% of annual revenue cost-wise. So a company that has maybe $100 million in annual revenue could be looking at as much as 10% of that. In other words, $10 million as a financial impact of a cybersecurity incident. Now, it's probably not going to cost them $10 million to secure everything, but it might cost them $1 million a year, and they just don't do it. It's just they don't bother doing it. Look at the huge breaches that we've had from some of these credit reporting agencies, if you will, that keep all this personal information and data on us, that have lost data for 200 million Americans, right? Really? They cared? And yet they just rake in money. They just print money. It's absolutely crazy. By the way, there was another report that was released a little earlier this year from CrowdStrike, and it has a report that's based on incident data, and the one they released earlier this year was from 2021. And it's showing that breaches related to ransomware attacks had grown by 82%. And the data showed that malware had only been used in 38% of successful intrusions, and 45% of attackers were manually conducting the attacks. So if you thought early on when we started talking here that ransomware was maybe the biggest problem, you're not entirely wrong, because ransomware is the biggest growing problem that we're seeing out there right now. So it's absolutely crazy. Now, the average time to move from an initial compromise, remember they're doing these things automated up front to try and find vulnerable systems or to try and get the ransomware out into your hands. That might be through a phishing attack, which, by the way, phishing attacks increased 29%. So from the time they get that initial compromise to the time they're attacking other systems on the network, it's still about 1.5 hours, according to the data that came out of CrowdStrike. Now, that is concerning, too, because that means you basically have an hour and a half after you've been compromised to detect it and do something about it. And that's why we use automated systems with our clients that really keep a close tab on everything, look for various types of compromises, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's an important thing to do, because if you can't tell if you've been compromised, you just can't defend yourself. Hey, if you sign up for my newsletter, I will send you my most popular special reports. That includes password special reports, how to use password managers, what the best ones are. Absolutely free, right? I got a couple of others that I'll send you, and you will get my weekly show notes that come out Tuesday mornings most weeks, and that will allow you to keep up to date on all of this, be a little bit ahead, in fact, of the radio show, because I'm talking about stuff that was in my insider show notes on Tuesday. So you get it in advance of everybody else. Just go to craigpeterson.com, sign up right there, and you will be well on your way. Hey, stick around, because we'll be right back. Any questions? Me at craigpeterson.com. We got a couple of things to talk about right now. We've got Elon Musk. He's got to be worried about this lawsuit that's coming up, and we'll tell you about that. And then also TikTok is in the news here. We got two different problems with TikTok to talk about today. Hi, you are not alone, at least when it comes to your security and privacy. Hi, I'm Craig Peterson, and you're listening to News Radio, WGAN AM 560 and FM 98.5. I'd like to invite you to join me Wednesday mornings at 7:34 with Mr. Matt. We'll keep you up to date. You know, of course, about this whole thing. Elon Musk said he wanted to buy Twitter for a measly, what was it, $44 billion, right? Real money. And that's a problem, especially when Twitter is alleged to be not worth as much as Twitter appears to be. You see, Twitter has had to file with the Securities and Exchange Commission reports about their income, obviously, right, and expenses and management, and they have forward-looking statements about what they're going to be doing in the future, and all of that goes into a pot and kind of gets stirred up. And once it's all stirred up, the investors look at it and say, yeah, okay, I want to invest in Twitter. One of the big variables that goes into the pot has to do with advertising revenue, which is based on eyeballs. How many eyeballs can Twitter attract? And of course, that means Twitter wants to keep as many eyeballs as possible on the site at once, right? And for the longest time possible. So that all makes some sense, but Twitter's been reporting in its public reports that less than 5% of the users / postings there on Twitter, but less than 5% of the users are actually bots. These bots are used by bad guys, evil companies, and there are a lot of those out there that are trying to promote themselves. Look at how great we are. Yes, look at, wow, we're trending on Twitter. You should buy our stuff. And in reality, what they're doing is they are paying people who have bots to post thousands of tweets from different accounts using that company's hashtag. It makes me ill, frankly, to think about this stuff, but that's what they do. So if Twitter has a lot of these bots that are fake and are just trying to drive up the investor's price for some random product, or maybe it's what happened during the last few election cycles where Russia, China were meddling and getting people to vote for Trump, against Trump, for Hillary, against Hillary, Biden, etc., right? Is it worth as much as investors thought? So I've been worried about what's going to happen here. Elon Musk, he's got to be worried if he actually ends up buying it. What's going to happen? Is the Securities and Exchange Commission going to do an investigation? Are they already doing one, frankly? Probably are. And is he going to be liable for it? So Twitter's value has dropped. Now, it obviously went up when Musk made that generous $44 billion purchase offer, but it has gone down since then. And since there are so many analysts saying, well, there's at least 10% bots, and others saying it's 40%, it's 60%, and that kind of is based on the traffic, right? The amount of traffic the bots are generating versus the number of accounts that are bot accounts. What happens? What should they do? How should they do it? How should they account for it? And if it's that high and there's questions about how high it is, then Twitter's stock value is going to go down. So Musk pulled out of this whole thing. And yeah, I can see why he did. However, Delaware is where a lot of these public companies are incorporated. That's where their, corporate headquarters are, if you will. That's where they get their authority to operate as a company. And the reason a lot of them do that in Delaware is Delaware has laws and taxes that are very favorable to publicly traded companies. And that says something right there, too, doesn't it? Well, Delaware has this thing called the Court of Chancery. And the judge that's handling Twitter's lawsuit against Musk, her name is Kathleen McCormick. She is the chief judge. In this case, is called the court's chancellor. Has what Reuters called a no-nonsense reputation, as well as the distinction of being one of the few jurists who has ever ordered a reluctant buyer to close a U.S. corporate merger. And specifically, she ordered last year an affiliate of a private equity firm to close its $550 million purchase of a holding company that makes cake decorating products. But because of the lockdown, the value of that cake decorating company dropped pretty dramatically because people just weren't going out and buying this stuff to make cakes. They weren't celebrating. They weren't having parties. They didn't have cakes, right? So she forced them to buy this other company at the original price, even though the value of the company, that holding company, had dropped. So this is going to be really rather interesting. If you look at her ruling, she said the buyers lost their appetite for the deal shortly after signing it, as government entities issued stay-at-home orders around the country, and the weekly sales declined dramatically. Rather than use reasonable efforts to work around a definitive credit agreement, the buyers called their litigation counsel and began evaluating ways to get out of the deal. Without input from the management, they prepared a draconian reforecast of the projected sales based on uninformed and largely unexplained assumptions that were inconsistent with real-time sales data. That's where Elon Musk may have an out, if he's played his cards right. Now, what really kind of confused me about all of this is that the guys at Twitter have a pretty solid case, because they were able to negotiate as part of this potential purchase or merger, whatever you might want to call it. Really, it's a purchase. They have a pretty solid case because they got some amazing language into this agreement. I just can't believe that Elon Musk and his attorneys allowed it to go in there. Now, these cases here in the Delaware Court of Chancery are decided by the presiding judge and not a jury. Although a judge can get an advisory jury to help consult, but the judge's decision can be appealed to the state Supreme Court, and then the decision is final. And Twitter proposed a 4-day trial with a September 19th start date. And the court, I believe, said we're going to push it off to October. I'll try and keep an eye on this case because I think it's fascinating to see what happens here as we go forward to our friend Elon Musk. Now, TikTok, oh man, if you didn't get my newsletter this week, which you should have had, my insider show notes on Tuesday morning, and follow through and read these 2 articles on TikTok, you really missed something. But I'll give you a quick summary here right now. We spoke about TikTok and what they have done here with this blackout challenge. Now, it's not TikTok. They're not the ones promoting the challenge, but they are making money off of it and they're promoting their site. It's just yet another challenge that TikTok has. Well, one of the things that's been happening in Ukraine with this Russian invasion is people have been making TikTok videos, and they have been posting them, and they include all kinds of stuff. I'm sure there's dead soldiers in there, Russian tanks that have been completely blown apart. What a bad design, by the way, and many other things. And TikTok says, hey, wait a minute, we can't keep these, even though they have been asked to preserve the Ukraine content for war crime investigations. What has come out recently, you remember Orange Man Bad said that TikTok needed to be shut down. They wanted it out. He wanted it out of the, and not just him, but other people, out of the app stores because it's being used by Chinese intelligence and they're doing all kinds of stuff. Yeah. Well, it turns out that our friends at TikTok have been, in fact, sending all of the stuff that you are filming to China. Now, TikTok is illegal to use in China, so they're not sending it to China to show the Chinese, because China is smart enough to not allow people to use TikTok. They're using it for espionage. TikTok even just a few weeks ago changed its usage document here, right? Terms of use, saying, we're going to use the video that you submit. We're going to collect biometric information. We're going to collect information about things and people in the foreground, things and people in the background. In other words, they're now putting together what you might call a social matrix, so they know who your friends are, what you're doing, they know about you, they're doing facial recognition of you. It goes on and on and on. Very, very bad. But because it's so popular with these young Ukrainians and even Russian troops who are posting footage of the war, they've got some stuff that would be great for the war crime investigators. And remember when President Trump said, oh, no, we got to cut out TikTok, and the left, his opposition, was saying, oh, no, TikTok is great. It's wonderful. Oh, and TikTok said, yeah, we have U.S.-based servers. Nothing to worry about here. I don't know what Trump is talking about. The guy's an idiot. Well, as I just mentioned, we found out absolutely that, yeah, they're saving it. They're sending it to China. And remember now, the Chinese Communist Party is a friend of Russia's. They're buying oil for very cheap prices. They're providing Russia with a number of different things. They're being a little cautious about it. But they will not allow war crime investigators to look at TikTok videos that have to do with the war in Ukraine. Absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. A lot of data pulled from your device, sent back to China, biometrics, face prints, voice prints, keystroke patterns, rhythms, search and browsing history, location information. Do not let your kids go to TikTok. And this week, I got an email from a listener saying that one of her close friends' child died because of the blackout challenge. If that's not enough. Facebook's about 18 years old, coming on 20. Facebook has a lot of data. How much stuff have you given Facebook? Did you fall victim for that? Hey, upload your contacts, we'll find your friends. Well, they don't know where your data is. This whole thing with Facebook has kind of exploded here lately. There's an article that had appeared online from our friends over at, I think it was, let me see here. Motherboard. I was right. And Motherboard's reporting that Facebook doesn't know what it does with your data or where it goes. Now, there's always a lot of rumors about different companies, and particularly when they're a big company and the news headlines are kind of grabbing your attention. And certainly Facebook can be one of those companies. So where did Motherboard get this opinion about Facebook just being completely clueless about your personal data? Well, it came from a leaked document. Yeah, exactly. So we find out a lot of stuff like that, right? I used to follow a website about companies that were going to go under, and they posted internal memos. It basically got sued out of existence. But there's no way that Facebook is going to be able to sue this one out of existence, because they are describing this as internally as a tsunami of privacy regulations all over the world. So, of course, if you're older, we used to call those tidal waves, but think of what the implication there is of a tsunami coming in and just overwhelming everything. So Facebook internally, their engineers are trying to figure out, okay, so how do we deal with people's personal data? It's not categorized in ways that regulators want to control it. Now, there's a huge problem right there. You've got third-party data, you've got first-party data, you've got sensitive categories data. They might know what religion you are, what your persuasions are in various different ways. There's a lot of things they might know about you. How are they all categorized? Now, we've got the European Union with their General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, we talked about when it came into effect back in 2018, and I've helped a few companies to comply with that. That's not my specialty. My specialty is the cybersecurity side. But in Article 5, this European law mandates that personal data must be collected for specified, explicit, and legitimate purposes and not further processed in a manner that is incompatible with those purposes. So what that means is that every piece of data, like where you are using Facebook or your religious orientation, can only be collected and used for a specific purpose and not reused for another purpose. So, as an example here that Vice is giving, in past, Facebook took the phone number that users provided to protect their accounts with two-factor authentication and fed it to its People You Know feature, as well as to advertisers. Yeah, interesting, eh? So Gizmodo, with the help of academic researchers, caught Facebook doing this, and eventually the company had to stop the practice. And this goes back to the earlier days where Facebook would say, hey, find out if your friends are on Facebook. Upload your contacts right now. And most people did. Right? What did you know back then about trying to keep your data private, to try and stop the proliferation of information about you online? Nothing, right? I think I probably even uploaded it back then, thinking, well, that'd be nice to see if I got friends here. We can start chatting, etc. Well, according to legal experts that were interviewed by Motherboard, who wrote this article and has a copy of the internal memo, this European regulation specifically prohibits that kind of repurposing of your phone number, of trying to put together the social graph. And the leaked document shows that Facebook may not even have the ability to limit how it handles users' data. Now, I was on a number of radio stations this week talking about this, and the example I gave is just look at an average business from the time it starts. You know, Facebook started how, right? Well, they scrape in pictures of young women off of Harvard University's main catalog, right? Contact page. And then asking people, well, what do you think of this? Rate this person, rate that person. And off they go, right? Trying to rate them. Yeah. All that matters to a woman, at least according to Mark Zuckerberg, or all that matters about a woman is how she looks, right? Do I think she's pretty or not? Ridiculous what he was doing. It's just, that's Zuckerberg, right? That's who he is. Not a great guy. Anyways, so you go from stealing pictures of young ladies, asking people to rate them, putting together some class information and stuff there at Harvard, and then moving on to other universities and then opening it up even wider and wider. And of course, that also created demand because you can't get on if you're not at one of the universities that we have set it up for. And then you continue to grow. You're adding these universities, you're starting to collect data, and you're making more money than God. So what do? Well, you don't have to worry about inefficiencies, I'll tell you that, right? One thing you don't have to do is worry about, we've got a lot of redundant work going on here. We've got a lot of teams working on basically the same thing. No, you've got more money than you can possibly shake a stick at. So now you go ahead and send that money to this group or that group, and they put together all of the basic information, right, that they want. They are pulling it out of this database and that database, and they're doing some correlation, writing some really cool SQL queries with incredible joins and everything else, right? And now that becomes part of the main code for Facebook. And then Facebook goes on to the next little project. And they do the same thing. Then the next project, then the next project. And then someone comes along and says, hey, we want this feature or that feature for our advertisers. And then in that goes. And then along comes candidate Obama. And one of the groups inside Facebook says, yeah. Here we go. Here's all of the information we have about everybody, and it's free. Don't worry about it, right? And then when Trump actually bought it and hired a company to try and process some of that information, he got in trouble. No. But the whole campaign could get access to anything they wanted to. Again, because the data wasn't controlled. They had no idea who was doing what with the data. And according to this internal memo, they still don't know. They don't even know if they can possibly comply with these regulations, not just in Europe, but we have regulations in pretty much all of the 50 states in the U.S. Canada, of course, has their own, Australia, New Zealand. Think about all the places Facebook makes a lot of money. So here's a quote from that. We build systems with open borders. The result of these open systems and open culture is well described with an analogy. Imagine you hold a bottle of ink in your hand. The bottle of ink is a mixture of all kinds of user data. You pour that ink into a lake of water, okay, and it flows everywhere. The document read, right? So how do you put that ink back in the bottle, in the right bottle? How do you organize it again so that it only flows to the allowed places in the lake? They're totally right about that. Where did they collect it from? Apparently, they don't even know where they got some of this information, this data from. Kind of reminds me of the no-fly list, right? You don't know you're on it and you can't get yourself off of it, right? It's kind of crazy. So this document that we're talking about was written last year by Facebook privacy engineers on the ad and business product team, whose mission is to make meaningful connections between people and businesses, and which, quote, sits at the center of our monetization strategy and is the engine that powers Facebook's growth. Interesting problems. And I see this being a problem well into the future for more and more of these companies. Look at Twitter as an example that we've all heard about a lot lately, and I've talked about as well. Along comes Elon Musk and he says, well, wait a minute now. I can make Twitter way more profitable. We're going to get rid of however many people. It's well over 1,000. And then we are going to hire more people. We're going to start charging. We're going to be more efficient. You can bet all of these redundancies that are in Facebook are also there in Twitter. And Twitter also has to comply with all of these regulations that Facebook is kind of freaking out about. Well, for really a very good reason. So this document is available to anybody who wants to look at it. I'm looking at it right now, talking about regulatory landscape and the fundamental problems of Facebook's data lake. And this is a problem that most companies have. Not as bad as Facebook does, but most companies, right, you grow. I have yet to walk into a business that needs help with cybersecurity and find everything in place as it should be. Because it grew organically, right? You started out with a little consumer firewall router and Wi-Fi, and then you added to it and you put a switch here and you added another switch behind that and moved things around. This is normal. This is not total incompetence on the part of the management, but my gosh, I don't know. Maybe they need an Elon Musk to straighten them out as well. Hey, stick around. I'll be right back, and sign up online at craigpeterson.com. Apparently, looting is one of the benefits of being a Russian soldier. And according to the reports coming out of Ukraine, they've been doing it a lot. But there's a tech angle on here that is really turning the tables on these Russian looters. Thanks for being with me today. I really appreciate it. And I'm honored, frankly, to be in front of this microphone. This is really something. You know, we know in wars there are people that loot, and typically the various militaries try and make sure, at least recently, that looting is kept to an absolute minimum. Certainly the Americans, the British, even the Nazis during World War II, the socialists there in Germany, they tried to stop some of the looting that was going on. I think that's probably a very good thing, right? Because what you end up with is just all of these locals that are just totally upset with you. I found a great article on The Guardian. And there's a village that had been occupied for about a month by Russian troops. And the people came back. They are just shocked to see what happened. They're giving a few examples of different towns. They found that alcohol was stolen and they left empty bottles behind, food wrappers, cigarette butts thrown all over the place in apartments and homes, piles of feces blocking the toilets, family photographs torn, thrown around the house. They took away all of the clothes. This is a quote from one of the people, literally everything, male and female coats, boots, shirts, jackets, even my dresses, and lingerie. This is really, really something. The Soviets didn't do this, but now Russian military apparently does. So over the past couple of weeks, there have been reporting from numerous places where Russian troops had occupied Ukrainian territory. And The Guardian, which is this UK newspaper, collected evidence that suggests looting by Russian forces was not merely a case of a few wayward soldiers, but a systematic part of Russian military behavior across multiple towns and villages. That's absolutely amazing. Another quote here. People saw the Russian soldiers loading everything onto Ural trucks, everything they could get their hands on. A dozen houses on the village's main street had been looted, as well as the shops. Other villagers reported losing washing machines, food, laptops, even a sofa, air conditioners, being shipped back. Just like, you might use UPS here. They have their equivalent over there. A lady here who was the head teacher in the school, she came back in, of course, found her home looted. And in the head teacher's office, she found an open pair of scissors that had been jammed into a plasma screen that was left behind. Because if they can't steal it, they're going to destroy it. They don't leave anything behind. They found the Russians had taken most of the computers, the projectors, and other electronic equipment. It's incredible. So let's talk about the turnaround here a little bit. You might have heard stories about some of these bad guys that have smashed and grabbed their way into Apple stores. So they get into the Apple store, they grab laptops on iPads, no longer iPods because they don't make those anymore, and iPhones. And they take them and they run with them. Well, nowadays, there's not a whole lot of use for those. Now, what they have been doing, some of these bad guys, is they take some parts and use them in stolen equipment. They sell them on the used market, etc. But when you're talking about something specific, like an iPhone, that needs specific activation, completely different problem arises for these guys. Because that iPhone needs to have a SIM card in order to get onto the cell network, and it also has built-in serial numbers. So what happens in those cases? Well, Apple goes ahead and disables them. So as soon as they connect to the internet, let's say they put them on Wi-Fi, they don't get a SIM card, they don't buy service from T-Mobile or Verizon or whoever it might be. So now they just connect to the Wi-Fi and it calls home because it's going to get updates. So I want to download stuff from the App Store and they find that it's been bricked. Now you can do that with a lot of mobile device managers that are available for all kinds of equipment nowadays, but certainly Apple equipment, where if a phone is lost or stolen or a laptop or other pieces of equipment, you can get on the MDM and disable it, have it remotely erase, etc. Now, police have had some interesting problems with that because a bad guy might go ahead and erase a smartphone that's in the evidence locker at the police station. So they're doing things like putting them into Faraday cages or static bags or other things to try and stop that. So I think we've established here that the higher tech equipment is pretty well protected. You steal it, it's not going to do you much good. So one of the things the Russians stole when they were in, it's called, I think you pronounce it Melitopol, which is, again, a Ukrainian city, is they stole all of the equipment from a farm equipment dealership and shipped it to Chechnya. Now, that's according to a source in a businessman in the area that CNN is reporting on. So they shipped this equipment. We're talking about combines, harvesters worth $300,000 a piece. They shipped it 700 miles. And the thieves were ultimately unable to use the equipment because it had been locked remotely. So think about agriculture equipment. John Deere in this case. These pieces of equipment, they drive themselves. It's autonomous. It goes up and down the fields. It goes any pattern that you want to. It'll bring itself within a foot or an inch of your boundaries, right, of your property, being very, very efficient the whole time, whether it's planting or harvesting, etc. And that's just a phenomenal thing because it saves so much time for the farmer, makes it easier to do. The companies like John Deere want to sell as many pieces of this equipment as they possibly can. And farming is known to be a, not terribly profitable business. It certainly isn't like Facebook. So how can they get this expensive equipment into the hands of a lot of farmers? Well, what they do is they lease it. So you can lease the equipment through a leasing company or maybe directly from the manufacturer, and now you're off and running. But what happens if the lease isn't paid? Now, it's one thing if you don't pay your lease on a $2,000 laptop, right? They're probably not going to come hunting for you. But when you're talking about a $300,000 harvester, they're more interested. So the leasing company has title to the equipment, and the leasing company can shut it off remotely, right? You see where I'm going with this? So that they can get their equipment in the hands of more farmers, because the farmers can lease it. It costs them less. They don't have to have a big cash payment, right? You see how this all works. So when the Russian forces stole this equipment that's valued, total value here is about $5 million, they were able to shut it all off. And obviously, if you can't start the engine because it's all shut off and it's all run by computers nowadays, and, there's pros and cons to that. I think there's a lot of cons. But what are you going to do? How's that going to work for you? Well, it isn't going to work for you. And they were able to track it. It had GPS trackers, find out exactly where it was. That's how they know it was taken to Chechnya and could be controlled remotely. And in this case, how'd they control it? Well, they completely shut it off. Even if they sell the harvesters for spare parts, they'll earn some money, but they sure aren't going to be able to sell them for the $300,000 that they were actually worth. Hey, stick around. We'll be right back, and visit me online at craigpeterson.com. If you sign up there, you'll be able to get my insider show notes, and every week I have a quick 5-minute training right there in your emails. craigpeterson.com. That's S-O-N, in case you're wondering. If you've been worried about ransomware, you are right to worry. It's up, it's costly, and we're going to talk about that right now. What are the stats? What can you do? What happens if you do get hacked? Interesting world. Ransomware has been a very long-running problem. I remember a client of ours, a car dealership, who we had gone in, we had improved all of their systems and their security, and one of their people, who was actually a senior manager, ended up downloading a piece of ransomware, one of these encrypted ones, and opened it up, and his machine, all of a sudden, ta-da, guess what? It had ransomware on it. One of those big red screens that say pay up. Send us this much Bitcoin and here's our address, right? All of that sort of stuff. And he called us up and said, what's going on here? What happened? Well, first of all, don't bring your own machine into the office. Secondly, don't open up particularly encrypted files using a password that they gave you. And thirdly, we stopped it automatically. It did not spread. We were able to completely restore his computer. Now, let's consider here at the consequences of what happened. So he obviously was scared. And within a matter of a couple of hours, we actually had him back to where he was, and it didn't spread. So the consequences there, they weren't that bad. But how about if it had gotten worse? How about if the ransomware also, before it started holding his computer ransom, went out and found all of the data about their customers, right? Do you think an auto dealership would love to hear that all of their customer data was stolen and released, all of the personal data of all of their customers, right? Obviously not. So there's a potential cost there. And then how long do you think it would take a normal company that thinks they have backups to get back online? Well, I can tell you it'll take quite a while, because the biggest problem is most backups don't work. We have yet to go into a business that was actually doing backups that would work to help restore them. And if you're interested, I can send you, I've got something I wrote up, be glad to email it back to you. Obviously, as usual, no charge, right? And you'll be able to go into that and figure out what you should do, because I break it down into the different types of backups and why you might want to use them or why you might not want to use them. But ransomware is a kind of a pernicious, nasty little thing, particularly nowadays, because it's two-factor, right? First is they've encrypted your data, you can't get to it. And then the second side of that is, okay, well, I can't get to my data, and now they're threatening to hold my data ransom, or they'll release it. So they'll put it out there. And of course, if you're in a regulated industry, which actually car dealers are, because they deal with financial transactions, leases, loans, that sort of thing, you can lose your license for your business. You can lose your ability to go ahead and, frankly, make loans and work with financial companies and financial instruments. It could be a very, very big deal. So there are a lot of potential things that can happen, all the way from losing your reputation as a business or an individual, losing all of the money in your operating account. And we've got a client that we picked up afterwards that, yes, indeed, they lost all of the money in their operating account. And then how do you make payroll? How do you do things? Well, there's a new study that came out from Checkpoint. Checkpoint is one of the original firewall companies, and they had a look at ransomware. What are the costs of ransomware? Now, bottom line, I'm looking at some stats here on a couple of different sites. One is, by the way, Conti, which is a big ransomware gang that also got hacked after they said we are going to attack anyone that doesn't defend Vlad's invasion of Ukraine, and then they got hacked and their information was released. But here's the ransomware statistics. This is from CloudWords. First of all, the largest ransom demand is $50 million, and that was in 2021 to Acer, big computer company. 37% of businesses were hit by ransomware in 2021. This is amazing. They're expecting by 2031, so in about a decade, ransomware is going to be costing about $265 billion a year. Now, on average, ransomware costs businesses $1.85 million to recover from an attack. Now, that's obviously not a one or two person place, but think of the car dealer again. How much money are they going to make over the year or over the life of the business, right? If you're a car dealer, you have a license to print money, right? You're selling car model or cars from manufacturer X. And now you have the right to do that, and they can remove that right. How many tens, hundreds of millions of dollars might that end up costing you? Yeah, big deal. Total cost of ransomware last year, $20 billion. Now, these are the interesting statistics here right now, so pay closer attention to this. 32% of ransomware victims paid a ransom demand. So about a third paid a ransom demand last year. It's actually down, because my recollection is it used to be about 50% would pay a ransom. Now, on average, that one-third of victims that paid a ransom only recovered 65% of their data. Now, that differs from a number I've been using from the FBI that's a little bit older that was saying it's a little better than 50%. But 65% of paying victims recovered their data. Now, isn't that absolutely amazing? Now, 57% of companies are able to recover their data using a cloud backup. Now, think about the different types of backup. Cloud backup is something that can work pretty well if you're a home user. But how long did it take for your system to get backed up? Probably took weeks, right? For a regular computer over a regular internet line. Now, restoring from backup is going to be faster because your downlink is usually faster than your uplink. That's not true for businesses that have real internet service like ours. It's the same bandwidth up as it is down. But it can take, again, days or weeks to try and recover your machine. So it's very, very expensive, and I wish I had more time to go into this. But looking at the costs here and the fact that insurance companies are no longer paying out for a lot of these ransomware attacks, it could be incredibly expensive for you. Incredibly. So here you go. The number one business types by industry for ransomware attacks: retail. That makes sense, doesn't it? Real estate, electrical contractors, law firms, and wholesale building materials. Isn't that interesting? And that's probably because none of these people are really aware or conscious of doing what? Of keeping their data secure, of having a good IT team, a good IT department. So there's your bottom line. Those are the guys that are getting hit the most. The numbers are increasing dramatically, and your costs are not just in the money you might pay as a ransom. And so as it turns out, in pretty much every case, prevention is less expensive and much better than the cure of trying to pay ransom or trying to restore from backups. Hey, you're listening to Craig Peterson. You can get my weekly show notes by just going to craigpeterson.com, and I'll also send you my special report on how to do passwords. Stick around, we'll be right back. You and I have talked about passwords before, the way to generate them, and how important they are. We'll go over that again a little bit in just a second, but there's a new standard out there that will eliminate the need for passwords. Passwords are kind of a necessary evil. At least they have been forever. I remember, I think the only system I've ever really used that did not require passwords was the IBM 360. Yeah, 360, you punch up the cards, all of the JCL, you feed it the card deck in, and off it goes and does its little thing. That was a different day, a different era. When I started in college, in university, we had remote systems, timeshare systems that we could log into, and there weren't much in the line of password requirements then. But you had a username, you had a simple password, and I remember one of our instructors, his name was Robert Andrew Lang, and his password was always some sort of a combination of R.A. Lang. So it was always easy to guess what his password was. Today, it has gotten a lot worse. Today, we have devices with us all of the time. You might be wearing a smart watch that requires a password. You, of course, probably have a smartphone that's also maybe requiring a password, certainly after it boots. Nowadays, they use fingerprints or facial recognition, which is handy but has its own drawbacks. But how about the websites you're going to, the systems you're using when you're at work and logging in? They all require passwords and usernames of some sort or another. Well, Apple, Google, and Microsoft have all committed to expanding their support for a standard that's actually been out there for a few years. It's called the FIDO standard. And the idea behind this is that you don't have to have a password in order to log in. Now, that's really kind of an interesting thing, right? Just looking at it, because we're so used to having this password-only authentication. And of course, the thing to do there is make sure you have, for your password, multiple words in the password. It should really be a passphrase. And between the words, put in special characters or numbers. Maybe mix upper, lowercase a little bit in those words. Those are the best passwords, 20 characters, 30 characters long. And then if you have to have a PIN, I typically use a 12-digit PIN. And how do I remember all of these? Because I use a completely different password for every website. And right now, let me pull it up. I'm using 1password.com's password manager. And my main password for that is about 25 characters long. And I have 3,135 entries here in my password manager. 3,100. That is a whole lot of passwords, right? As well as software licenses and a few other things in there. That's how I remember them, is using a password manager. 1password.com is my favorite. Now, obviously, I don't make any money by referring you there. I really do like that. Some others that I've liked in the past include LastPass, but they really messed up with some of their cybersecurity last year, and I lost my faith in it. So now what they're trying to do is make these websites that we go to, as well as some apps, to have a consistent, secure, and passwordless sign-in. And they're going to make it available to consumers across all kinds of devices and platforms. That's why you've got Apple, Google, and Microsoft all committing to it. And you can bet everybody else is going to follow along, because there's hundreds of other companies that have decided they're going to work with the FIDO Alliance, and they're going to create this passwordless future, which I like this idea. So how does this work? Well, basically, you need to have a smartphone. I'm just going to go with the most standard way that this is going to work here in the future. And you can then have a pass key. This is kind of like a multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication. So, for instance, right now, when I sign into a website online, I'm giving a username, I'm giving a password, and then it comes up and it asks me for a code. So I enter in a 6-digit code, and that code changes every 30 seconds. And again, I use my password manager from onepassword.com in order to generate that code. So that's how I log into Microsoft sites and Google sites and all kinds of sites out there. So it's kind of a similar thing here. Now, for the sites for my company, because we do cybersecurity for businesses, including regulated businesses, we have biometrics tied in as well. So to log into our systems, I have to have a username, I have to have a password. I then am sent to a single sign-on page where I have to have a message sent to my smart device that then has a special app that uses biometrics, either a Face ID or a fingerprint, to verify who I am. So yeah, there's a lot there, but I have to protect my customers' data, something that very, very few, it's crazy, actual so-called managed security services providers do. But it's important, right? By the way, if you want my password special report, just go to craigpeterson.com, sign up for my email list. I'll send that to you. That's what we're sending out right now for anyone who signs up new at craigpeterson.com. And if you'd like a copy of it and you're already on the list, just go ahead and email me, M-E, at craigpeterson.com, and ask for the password special report, where I go through a lot of this sort of thing. So what will happen with this is you go to a website and it might come up with a QR code. So you then scan that QR code with your phone and verify it, authorize it on your phone. You might, again, have it set up so that your phone requires facial recognition, or perhaps it'll require a fingerprint. And now you are in, which is very cool. They fixed some security problems in FIDO over the last few years, which is great. Over the coming year, you're going to see this available on Apple devices, Google, Microsoft platforms. And it really is simple, stronger authentication. That's what FIDO calls it, right? But it is going to make your life a lot easier. It is a standard, and the passwordless future makes a whole lot of sense for all of us. Now, I want to talk about another thing here that has bothered me for a long time. I have a sister-in-law who is in the medical field and gives prescriptions, a doctor's thing. And I think she's not quite a doctor. I can't remember what she has. She's an LPN or something. Anyhow, so she will get on a Zoom call with someone, and they'll go through medical history and what's happening right now, and she'll make prescriptions. And so I warned her about that, saying, it is very bad to be using Zoom, because Zoom is not secure, never has been, probably never will be, right? If you want secure, you have to go and pay for it from one of these providers like WebEx. That's what we use. We have a version of WebEx that is set up to be secure. So I talked to her about that and said, hey, listen, you can't do this. You've really got to go another way here. And so she started using one of these mental or medical health apps. What I want to talk about right now specifically are some checks that were just performed, some audits on mental health apps. That's why I messed up a second ago. But what they looked at is that things are a serious, serious problem there. And in fact, the threat post is calling it creepy. frankly. Just plain old creepy. So they've got some good intentions. They want to help with mental health. You've probably seen these or at least heard them advertised, so you can get on the horn with a mental health professional, a doctor or otherwise, in order to help you here with your psychological or spiritual well-being. And people are sharing their personal and sensitive data with third parties. And of 32 mental health and prayer mobile apps that were investigated by the open source organization, 28 of the 32 were found to be inherently insecure and were given a privacy not included label, including others here. So this is a report that was released here by the open source organization, tied into Mozilla. Mozilla, those are the Firefox people. They have what they call their minimum security standards. So things like requiring strong passwords, managing security updates and vulnerabilities, etc. 25 of the 32 failed to meet even those minimum security standards. So these apps are dealing with some of the most sensitive mental health and wellness issues people can possibly have, right? Depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, domestic violence, eating disorders. And they are being just terrible with your security. Mozilla researchers spent 255 hours or about 8 hours per product peering under the hood of the security, watching the data that was going back and forth, right, between all of these mental health and prayer apps. It was just crazy. So, for example, 8 of the apps reviewed allowed weak passwords that range from digit 1 as the password, to 1111, while a mental health app called MoodFit only required 1 letter or digit as a password. Now, that is very concerning for an app that collects mood and symptom data. So be very careful. 2 of the apps, BetterHelp, a popular app that connects users with therapists, and Better Stop Suicide, which is, of course, a suicide prevention app, have vague and messy, according to Mozilla, privacy policies that have little or no effect on actual user data protection. So be very, very careful. And if you're a mental health professional or a medical professional, don't just go and use these open video calls, etc., etc. Find something good, and there are some standards out there. Again, visit me online, get my insider show notes every week, get my little mini trainings. They come out most weeks. Just go to craigpeterson.com, and I'll send you my special report on passwords and more.